Welcome to Get On With It, Inspiration for Life and Leadership. I'm your host, Sue MacArthur, President of Strategic Talent Management. We've all met them, the people who have a presence and a unique point of view that make us want to lean in and say, tell me more. In this podcast, we celebrate these people and provide a platform through which they can share their insights. Whether you lead a company, a community organization, or just your own life, we offer you these moments of clarity, hope, and inspiration. So let's get on with it. In this episode, I'm very fortunate to be joined by Jim Bouchard. Jim is a leadership activist, speaker, author, and founder of the Keep It Human Network. Welcome to Get On With It, Jim.
Oh, it's an honor. It's great to be with you this morning.
Thank you. So I'd like to start with your origin story. How did you come to do the work that you do, and what experiences shaped your point of view?
Always a loaded question there, right? Yeah. Well, this whole adventure, it kind of started with me being a drug addict and a dropout. And I won't get into all the gory details today, but the point is I'd reached kind of a rock bottom moment in my life, right? And I had to find a way out of it. And it's funny because as I got into leadership activism and all that stuff, I used to think it was a pretty poor resume for someone dealing with leadership. But I realize now it's a very useful one, because leadership's about a lot of things, but one of the most important things it's about is transformation, right? In leadership, you're in the transformation business. You're changing yourself, you're changing your organization, changing the people around you. And so who better to talk about that than someone who had to learn that process in order to survive? And as I was coming out of my drug episode, I got involved in martial arts. That was part of my recovery process. Not overtly intentionally, but it was really a major part of it. And so then accidentally, that turned into a 30-year career. and then accidentally that turned into the speaking, because people started to ask me to share these ideas, with people that were in business and how to apply these ideas in real life and in business. So that's how the whole thing got started. And here we are today.
Well, I know you have a book coming out soon, The Only Certainty, the title of the book and the title of this podcast. So what does that phrase mean to you?
Yeah. And hey, and I don't brag much, but that's going to be number 11.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've been busy.
Been busy, yeah. Well, it actually came out of, obviously my personal life has been an adventure in uncertainty, you could say, right? Drug addicts are not the most certain people in the world, or, there's a lot of reasons behind that adventure. But I learned along the way how to reconcile, how to embrace it, really. I don't try to convince people to avoid uncertainty or to be afraid of it. Some of the best things, all the best things in my life came out of the worst moments of doubt and pain and uncertainty and chaos. Now, I'm not saying you have to go looking for it, and you don't have to, all right? You just ask where the title came. The title comes from a piece of ancient wisdom. Pliny the Elder, who was one of the Western philosophers from a couple thousand years ago, he said something that would make a real good t-shirt. Said, the only certainty is uncertainty. Which sounds really stupid until you think about it. But that's really it, right? I mean, none of us can really approach tomorrow with absolute certainty that we know anything about what's going to happen. And if you doubt that, most of the people I'm sure listening to your podcast can remember the day before we got locked down for COVID-19, or the day before the attacks 9/11, right? Mm-hmm. Very few, if any, people anticipated any of that happening. I mean, there was the possibility of an event like that happening, but I don't think very few of us where we live don't wake up and say, oh, there's going to be bombs dropping tomorrow or planes flying into buildings and things like that. Right. But it happened, right? And that changed all of our lives. Now, what came out of that? A lot of really great things came out of that. The iconic one is the Great Depression. People talk about the Great Depression or any number of the recessions we've had since then. Fortunes were made in those times, right? People saw opportunity that was there. And that's what the whole thing about embracing uncertainty is. The more we can find some comfort with uncertainty, the more we can embrace it. Now, that doesn't mean, like I said, doesn't mean that we just say, oh, well, we'll take what comes, although that helps a little bit, right? We do want to, we want to establish some reasonable level of comfort, security, and certainty with a lot of the things in our life. But we always have to acknowledge that we can't be absolutely certain. And then how do we manage these things? Can we anticipate certain conditions and circumstances? Yeah. Do we know exactly what's going to cause them? No. Yeah. Take COVID, right? I mean, what were the biggest challenges during COVID that I've heard from business people? Interruption in supply chain, stop in cash flow, things like that. We didn't know COVID was going to cause it, but any of us at any time in business and leadership can say those are likely events that are going to happen at some point to some degree. And the best we can do, we can prepare for that. Okay. And
Right.
yeah.
Right. You say that people perform at their best when they know that their leaders care. How does that principle apply when everything around us feels uncertain or unstable?
Well, what do you want to hear when the proverbial poop hits the fan, right? What do you want to hear from your leaders? That's the thing. Do you want to see them running around with chickens with their head cut off? I mean, obviously we don't want that. Two of the hallmark indicators of effective leadership are vulnerability and process of uncertainty, internal and external. We can get into that in pretty big detail. We might substitute the word skepticism in there, right? A leader that's absolutely, well, who has all the answers? We have a name for that person. It starts with an A, ends with an E. I won't say it on your show out loud. The best leaders are not people with all the answers. They're not the people who know, even when they make a decision, the best leaders are the ones who question it, right? The best leaders are the people who know how to formulate the right questions as they go along. And that's a never-ending process. Once I make a decision, was that the right decision? I don't know. It was at the time. It was the best I could do at the time. But immediately questioning, now, is there a way to do it better? Right? Are there other anticipated things that are going to happen from this? Our famous unintended consequences, right? Which always happen. And then how do we respond to that? So the process never ends. Someone who's just absolutely certain is delusional. I mean, that's the clinical term for it. So, right? Yeah, so there you go. So what do people want to hear? They want to hear especially when chaos hits the fan. Well, if I give you a really cool example, when COVID hit, and the lockdowns really started to take effect, we had a lot of our clients and people we were working with calling, they said, Jim, what do we do? How do we keep our people inspired? And I said, I don't know. I've never been through this before, right? We're going to have to work this out
Nobody
together.
had the playbook for that.
Nobody had the playbook. We're going to have to work it out. So one woman, she ran a pretty good sized company. And I asked her, well, what are you doing? And she said, oh, it's stupid. I said, well, tell me what you're doing. She said, all I can think of doing is just calling everyone. I said, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. Well, what are you asking them? And when I tell that story live, I usually take a pause because people will say, you're getting your work done, blah, blah, blah. No, she didn't ask any of that stuff. She just called her people and said, how are you? What can I do to help you? Is there anything I can do to help you? And her team responded just amazingly. I mean, it was crazy, the successes that she had during that time, which kind of defied the odds. And all it was that simple act of caring, right? That's it. It's simple. It's not easy, especially when you're in a situation like that. But I think that's much more profound than the big speech. If inspiration is touching people's hearts, not just their heads, does it always have to be a grand speech, great piece of writing? No, the simplest things are the ones that have the most impact, that touch people's hearts on a daily basis, right?
Mm-hmm. We find during uncertain times that belief and faith can be very comforting, but it can also be dangerous if it's fueled by misinformation. How can leaders navigate that?
Oh, that terrible 4-letter word, misinformation, right? No, I haven't figured out a way to define that, because almost any information that we get at any given time can be later labeled as misinformation, right?
Or biased, or
yeah, well, sure. And how many cognitive biases do we deal with, whether we know it or not, on a daily basis? Is there 33 different cognitive biases recognized by psychologists, something in that neighborhood? I don't think we sit here and go down the list every day, right?
No.
But it's worth understanding them to a degree because yeah, we're like corks on the water, cognitively a lot of the time. And sometimes we're making decisions or responding to things for reasons we don't even understand or process because we're responding emotionally. So yeah, the misinformation thing. I think we just have, that's part of being comfortable with uncertainty is finding some way to navigate the amount of information, because we have information coming at us from a fire hose these days, right? And we have to prioritize. We have to pick out what's the best. Now, at the risk of getting a little bit technical, I'll say this. The best technique I've found for it to deal with it is to just sit down once in a while and say, focus on what I can do rather than worrying about what I can't do anything about, you see? And that I learned as a drug addict. I learned that coming out of the process of trying to quit drugs. There were a lot of things working against me at the time, but I couldn't do anything about a lot of those things. So I started to learn how to sift it a little bit and focus on what can I do today, no matter how small that might be. What can I do in this moment, no matter how small that might look. Sometimes it becomes the most profound step you can take. You might not realize it at the time, but just a little step forward makes a big difference. So it's trying to prioritize it. And right now we're going through a cycle of it right now. A lot of people are stressed out about what's happening over in Iran and the Middle East, right? And it is something to be concerned about. Don't get me wrong. We can't, the ostrich sticks his head in the sand, his rear end's still hanging up there in the air ready to get kicked, right? So we have to, we do have to understand what's going on in the world around us, but we also have to sit down and say, what can I do about this today? What can I do? And in that situation, you might have more political influence than I do. I have very little power to do anything about that right now. I can vote for who I think will manage it best in the next elections. I can reach out to people. That's a cool thing too. We're all connected. There were riots in Kenya, or demonstrations in Kenya that the police responded to and killed several people. Ironically, because they were protesting the same thing that happened last year. But I have a couple of dear friends and business partners there. What could I do? I can't go over there and protect them, but I can reach out to them. I can see how they're doing and just offer some caring, right?
Right.
And so that's how we prioritize those things. What can I do rather than worrying about what I can't do?
Right. Can you control it? Can you influence it? Or do you just have to let it go?
A lot of times we just have to let it go, right? But again, I think sometimes the smallest gesture, it might not feel like that, but just reaching out. I know in my life, there's people who literally saved my life just by paying attention to me for a few minutes, just offering some time, not even advice or, some kind of consolation or anything, just spending time. And that's one of the coolest things I ever heard. I wish I could remember. I'll have to ask Chad, my AI guy, if he can find the attribution for it. But the greatest gift you can give another human being is your attention. I think that's a really beautiful thing. And it's very powerful. And if more leaders would pay attention to that, we'd be in pretty good shape.
Right. It seems that some people are just naturally more comfortable with uncertainty and a certain amount of chaos, where others can be paralyzed by it.
Yeah.
Is being comfortable with uncertainty something that you can learn and develop, or is it just we've got it or we don't?
Hey, some people argue with me about this, but I'd say it's the only way to develop comfort with uncertainty. And I think part of the reason it's interesting because I'm conflicted about this. We can generalize about generational cohorts, right? And that does have some utility, but we've got to be very careful because the generalization can never help us interact with the individual, right? There's always, every individual has exceptions to the generalizations, but they are useful to a degree, right? And we've probably crippled 2 generations at least by overprotecting them, right? By making things too safe. So when people, and it happens a lot in our workshops where people will say, well, how do I develop more comfort with uncertainty? How do I develop more courage? Courage is really one of the antidotes to that, right? How do I do that? Well, you have to expose yourself to it. And as leaders, we have to make sure we're exposing our rising and emerging leaders to these conditions, right? If we're creating conditions where everything is safe, there's no risk, there's no danger. There is no courage. Courage is defined, right, by our ability, our willingness to face risk and danger and fear. That's what courage is. So how do we get people to be stronger and more comfortable with uncertainty? We expose them to it. Now, we have to manage that risk, right? I mean, whether you're a parent or you're the CEO of a big company, that's up to you. You have to manage how much, and that's important. I learned it as a martial artist. I learned it as a sensei. If I fire hose somebody with technique, all I'm going to do is discourage them, right? We have to parcel it out and expose it. Always challenge them a little bit above their ability. That's the great secret I learned from my martial arts masters. Any good coach does that, right? You challenge somebody, any good teacher does that. You challenge somebody just a little bit over their head. And then as they develop that skill and their skill level and their comfort comes up to match that. And that's probably the natural part though. Anyway, as human beings, psychologists are really uncovering this now. That's our natural state. When we're not, little kids, right? What do little kids do? You go out and climb a tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
you don't think about falling out.
You don't think about, but right? But if you do too, most little kids are not going to climb a 60-foot tree, right? They're scared. They climb up to the first branch. And then once in a while they fall out and they say, well, that hurt, but I'm still here. Then the next time they go to the second branch and so on till they develop more courage and more comfort. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly how our minds work. So when we deprive people of that, what happens? Well, we're seeing the effects of it now. We have epidemic levels of anxiety, of depression, of avoidance syndromes, right? Mm-hmm. And that's no accident. It's because we created an environment that was, I won't even say it was too safe because it was falsely safe. All the dangers were still there, weren't they?
Absolutely.
Right? We just had enough abundance in our culture that we were able to kind of shield people from the effects for a while. Like the last recession. I mean, people weren't starving here. Let's face it. Mm-hmm. That isn't what we complain when gas goes up and down a quarter. And I get it. I'm American. I complain too. Don't get me wrong. But still, sometimes I spoke in Cuba a few years ago, and I still can't even put that experience in words. But I'll say this: when I came back, even though I still fall to it once in a while, boy, I catch myself, and my corrective line that I speak to myself is first world problems. I let myself drift back to Cuba and what those people were going through and what they shared with me. I just down here, what the hell do I have to complain about? And again, that's part of the process of conditioning that we can, that's part of the process of becoming more comfortable with it. Not that I like it, right? Not that we don't, we love being uncomfortable or uncertain or scared, but I've learned to embrace it and appreciate it.
Right. It's about controlling our reactions to it. Sometimes that's all we can control is how we react to something.
You just said something almost verbatim that one of my martial arts masters said to me years ago. Yeah. And we were talking about the context of self-defense techniques, right? Mm-hmm. He said, he said, look, if you knew what was coming, you wouldn't need all this stuff, would you? I said, right. We're reacting because you just got whacked over the head from behind. You didn't see it coming. That's why we practice this. And it's interesting because that's it in a nutshell. So, and that's part of the technique too. The more we think about those things, what are the possibilities? What could happen? But then we got to be careful not to fall in that what do they call it? The probabilistic fallacy, right? And people that are heavy into data fall into this a lot. And this isn't to be political about climate change one way or the other, but one of the big debates over climate change is that a lot of what we believe about climate change is based on what? Computer modeling. And those models are very limited on the input side, and they're very susceptible to minute changes in those inputs, right? Which we can alter at any given time depending on the information we have. So to say something is, let's say 80%, let's bring it back to Earth. Even the weather report, people say, oh, there's a 4% chance of rain today. Doesn't mean it's not going to rain, right?
Right.
There's a possibility of rain. A weatherman explained this to me one time. Even 0% doesn't mean there's no chance of rain. What it means is out of 100 days with these conditions, it didn't rain 1,000 times. That's all it means. But it could.
It still could.
They still could. And maybe it's better to have that umbrella in the car. It's better to have it and not need it than to not have it and need it, right?
Right, right. So you say that it's not a leader's job to eliminate uncertainty, but to help others move through it. That sounds great, but how do we do that? What does that look like in practice?
Well, like I said, first of all, it's also a leader's responsibility to expose people to it. If you want to develop people, if you want them to get stronger and more comfortable with that, you have to find situations. And in management, it's relatively simple, but not always efficient to do it. You've got to give people a project, a task that's a little bit over their skill level at this time, right? To challenge them a little bit and let them build into that. Okay, so that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, I think from a personal level, we have to go out and seek it too.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't always have to be within your domain. That's kind of interesting too. Sometimes well, I'm a musician, so I'm a little biased about this, but I'll usually, when people are struggling with it, I say, what have you learned and new in the last few years? Well, I learned something at work. I learned how to do AI. I learned how to do a spreadsheet thing. Yeah, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Something really difficult that you never did before. How about learning how to play guitar? Oh, I always wanted to learn guitar. Well, good, do it. You know why? Because it's hard. Learn a new language. Why? Because it's hard. Okay, and you do these things, and it's fascinating, the physiology behind it. Our brain will rewire itself and make stronger connections. Now, that process is absolutely translatable to anything else that you face. So let's take guitar, and I say this, or any instrument, any musical instrument, they found that's one of the best personal development tools out there, and learning a language is too. And for one thing, it's because you have to develop some courage. Even if you're just playing it's fact, it's worse. When you're sitting in your room playing by yourself, you're worried someone next door is going to hear you, and you're going to suck, right?
Right, they're going to be judging you.
Yeah, but to get out in front of an audience is a different experience too, right? You're exposing yourself to that risk. Now, our brains don't really make the differentiation between going out and playing guitar for a bunch of your friends at a party for the first time, or facing the tiger at the edge of the jungle there. Mm-hmm. It's the same chemical process that goes on.
Wow.
So by doing those things, it's pretty cool that we are strengthening our overall capacity to deal with uncertainty, to be more courageous. But now there's a big caveat there. And this one I learned, and this was pre-drug experience, I always clarify. I was a firefighter when I was a young person. And I learned, we'd go through the same training, a bunch of us, right? But you never know till you get into a burning building who's going to stay, who's going to do the job, and who's going to freak out, right? So you can train and train and train, but then it's only when you're exposed to the reality of it. That's the ultimate test. So, yeah.
And sometimes that's going to really surprise you because it was the last person you expected to freak out.
I used to think that. Now I know it's the person with the biggest mouth that
Yeah, I guess that's true.
The one that, the one that's beating their chest before and teasing you during the training. And yeah, they're usually the ones that freak out first.
Right. I've got this. Oh,
yeah. Yeah, the quiet one. Geez, we're worried about that guy. Nah, they're usually the ones that rise up to it.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a wicked bad generalization, though.
Oh, the wicked bad. There's the Mainer in you coming
There's
out.
the Maine, right? There's my Yankee coming out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know you've developed a model, IEG, which inspire, empower, guide. How does this help leaders through times of uncertainty, like what we're experiencing now?
Yeah. We could spend all day talking about that. Over time, that evolved to become the root of everything I understand about leadership. And you can tell by now, I'm not the lollipops and puppy dogs guy. This stuff they're not just pretty words. These things, we call them disciplines. And again, from my martial arts life, I learned that a discipline really is the development, cultivation, and practice of a meaningful and purposeful habit, right? That's what it is. Simple, not easy. But what I stress about that is these, like I said, they're not pretty words. These are things too often organizations will make nice posters and flyers. They'll send people to a weekend seminar and that's it. It's over. They learn the pretty words. These things need to be embedded in our practice in our lives as leaders. Now, I'm going to give you the real simple version, but the real simple version can open your head. You can think about these things almost endlessly. Inspiration. Touch people's hearts, not just their heads. Aren't we more emotional creatures than we are rational creatures? We'll circle back to that in a second. Empower. Make sure people have what they need to succeed. And make sure you understand that, because that's the most difficult part. We workshop empowerment sometimes for a day or more. It's easy to sit down and make a list of what you think people need. Did you ask them? Are you sure? And what do they need under different circumstances and conditions that you're trying to anticipate? And then guide, which is really, we'll call it in business mentoring. Be willing to share your knowledge, your experience, your wisdom, face to face. All right, not through a process manual, not through a class necessarily. Those are all important. They're all good. I wanted to circle back to inspiration because I make a distinction between that and motivation. Motivation is simple. It's easy. It's you bribe people or you scare them. All right.
Really, those are the only choices.
Yeah, well, motivation's the carrot and stick thing, right? Problem is we're not donkeys and we know we ain't getting the carrot. The stick's too long.
Yeah.
Does it work? Yeah, motivation works to a certain degree. It will work you up to expected outcomes. And there's a lot of dangers in motivation. Think of the Wells Fargo disaster a few years ago, right? You can incentivize people, intentionally or unintentionally, you can incentivize people into very bad behavior sometimes, especially if those incentives aren't connected to ethics or principles, right? Values. So be careful with that. It works to a degree. It's a decent tool, but very limited. Inspiration, touch people's hearts, connect them to a bigger sense of purpose. I'm working for something bigger than myself, right? I'm working because you and I together are going to make a significant change. That I'm working, it can be internal too. I'm doing a particular, in fact, when I was working in the shipyard, I remember asking this one guy who did a pretty mundane job, geez, this job must suck. No, I love my job. I said, seriously, you like scraping the paint off the side of submarines? And no, I love I said, I'm here for 8 hours a day. I go home. I have a really nice house. I have a really great family. I said, you see, the emotional connection was different, but he connected that to his job. His job provided him the means to have all that, right? So that's what it's all about. Connect with people's hearts, not just their heads. And it sounds real simple, right? Mm-hmm. But it takes a lot of work to do that and to develop, to make it tangible, to develop disciplines that we can embed in our practice. Now, one of the best ones I heard in a long time, I was speaking just a couple weeks ago in Maryland, and we had a breakout session after the keynote, and that's where we were digging into inspiration quite a bit. And this one young manager, she stood up and she said, because we were asking, what are things that you do every day to connect, right, with people's hearts? She said, even when I don't feel like it, I train myself to, when I see somebody coming down the hallway, I smile. I said, wow. I literally dropped the microphone on the ground, which didn't please the tech people very much.
A little touchy about that stuff.
Yeah, but it was so cool what she said, and I said, oh, geez, I'm going to steal that. It's so simple. And the whole room just loved it. I mean, so simple, so powerful, right?
And for her as well as the person receiving the smile.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But she also said how she'd done it long enough that there were a couple times when she had stories that you can't always hope for the stories that come back. You got to give these things unconditionally. But there have been a couple times in her life where someone came back and said, you know what? I think one of the stories she said, like somebody lost a spouse or something that week and they just didn't want to be at work. And that smile changed everything that day. I can get through this day because, this person just brought me a little bit of sunshine, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Simple.
What do leaders too often get wrong when trying to help others through uncertainty and disruption? What did you just see over and over again that you wish you could scream to from the rooftop, stop doing that?
You got to buy the workshop for that. No, seriously, that can take hours. That's it's one of the reasons I love workshops so much, right? And don't get me wrong, I love doing podcasts like this. This is really cool, and we get to connect with I get to connect with people like you, which is really cool. We get to share ideas and spread them. Keynotes, I love doing keynotes, but hey, that's an hour, right? There's only so much we can do. There's only so much of a conversation we can have, but workshops, we can roll up our sleeves and dig in. And sometimes that gets really emotional. It gets really rough. And the question you just asked is one of the questions that can really bring out a lot of emotion. What are leaders doing wrong? I think that, frankly, I think that's the best question any of us can ask ourselves, right? I learned, again, I'm going to learn lessons learned from being a drug addict. When I decided to quit drugs, I literally had to look in the mirror and acknowledge that I was a drug addict, that I was a mess, that I was not the person I wanted to be. That was pretty painful, but you know what? I learned to embrace it. And then fast forward to martial arts. You go into most martial arts studios, and you'll see a whole line of mirrors, a whole wall full of mirrors. It's not to check our hair, it's to expose our mistakes. It's so we get feedback quickly. This is what we want to correct. The best mirror for a leader is the people we serve, right? So the more we can pay attention and understand and appreciate and solicit their input, their feedback, that's really important. So when we ask ourselves, what can I do to help people? The best thing we can do is to go to our people and say, hey, again, you don't have to do it in a morose way. You don't have to do it in a crying, but to be open and say, we just worked through this big change in the company. We just onboarded this new customer service system, whatever. Say, what do you guys see? What are some of the things I could have done better as a leader to help you through that? That's a pretty powerful question. Some people think that will lessen you in their eyes. No, it doesn't. That will elevate you in their eyes. And we can cite all kinds of proof for that. You don't have to go out and say, hey, where did I suck? Although I've had people do that and pull it off pretty nicely. It depends on your personality, your approach, right? But to ask, what do you think I could have done a little bit better to help you out, right? And to ask that question of yourself all the time. So I don't know if there's a top 10 list. I think I'm going to throw it into bigger buckets. I think one of the biggest challenges is not committing time to your people. And there's all kinds of good reasons for that, especially when there's chaos happening around you or an emergency happening around you. But it's real easy to cut back on the time. And then all of a sudden, 2-3 years later, you realize I didn't spend time with my people. I didn't prioritize them. I was speaking at an event in Cleveland. It's kind of interesting. Just before I went on, they gave me a copy of their journal, which changed my whole open, because there was an article, just by chance, opened an article that said, how I learned to put my people first. And I'm very short. The first paragraph was, these are guys that worked in construction and trades and stuff. He said, I realized I'd forgotten to put my people first. Looked out the window, saw a whole yard full of equipment, and I had nobody to run it.
Oh, wow.
You see? And the rest of the article was about how he transformed himself and shifted back to human-centric approach, right? So it's that. Time is a huge one. Making sure your people know that you care. Practicing active listening. A lot of times we forget to practice active listening. And Carl Rogers wrote the book on it, literally. And his book only takes an hour to read. I still think it's one of the most powerful books out there. And, if you don't care, don't bother. I think too many leaders will talk about caring about their people. They'll put up posters. They'll make some nice speeches once a year at the family picnic or something. But if you're not practicing it every day, if you don't create a discipline, then it rings hollow. People know, right? People see through it. So I think those are kind of the top mistakes, and they're all related to the same thing, right?
In the absence of information, people assume the worst.
Right.
So be transparent and give them the information.
As much as you can, right? Yeah. There are certain things that are proprietary, that's for sure, but I think that should be well thought out. If I'm protecting something, I think the first question I should ask is why? Why is it all that important to protect? And you may have a good reason. I'm not disputing that, right? But make sure you do. That's all. Yeah, don't protect something because it's your turf. You think you're protecting your turf. You think you're shielding people from the problem. Hey, one of the best ways you can find, this leads me to another story. when I was speaking in Cuba, it was interesting. That was for the Caribbean Confederation of Credit Unions. They hosted it in Cuba because they wanted to expose Cuba to that type of financing. Cuba was very interested in that type of financing. Well, I met a young manager from Jamaica. He was just kind of just out of college. He'd been in management for a year or two, maybe. And we were talking about what you just said, how to, being open, being transparent, soliciting advice from the front lines, having, a good circular communication with your frontline people. And he said, Jim, I can't do that. I said, why? He said, because they'll think I don't know what I'm talking about. I said, but you don't. You don't know what you're talking about. You were never a teller in a credit union. You told me you went out of college, you went right into management. That's all fine, but you hadn't had the experience they had. I said, they know what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. You don't. So very long story, very short, because we worked it out for a while. He agreed to go and try this. And he did say that in his particular organization culture too, it was an old command and control culture. He was afraid his supervisors would think he didn't know what he was doing too. So anyway, I understood. Like I said, these are rational fears. So I couldn't hope for this turning out any better. A couple of years later, I was doing a conference in Las Vegas, and I hear this guy running down the hallway say, "Hey, Sensei!" I said, "Hey, what's happening?" He says, "You remember me?" I said, "Yeah, Jamaica, right?" He said, "Yeah." So we got talking. I said, "Well, did you try any of the things we were workshopping?" He said, "Yeah, I did." I said, "Well, how's it working out?" He said, "Well, with my people, it's working out great." He said, "They're bringing me ideas. They're bringing me solutions to problems I didn't even know I had." See, there it is, right?
Right.
Yeah. And I said, "How's it working out with your supervisors?" "Oh, they don't like it."
They're being held accountable.
Yeah, I said, "Well, I can't, I really can't help you with that very much. I'll just say this. Hopefully you'll find some comfort in it." I said, "Those guys are getting long in the tooth. They're going to be aging out." I said, "You're going to be in the corner office in a few years." I said, "You're going to be the one that changes the culture. You're going to be the one that creates that dynamic process, right?" I said, "So yeah, you just have to hang in there." But I said, it was cool by exposing himself, right, and saying, "Hey, you know what? I don't have all the answers. What do you guys think?" Then they started bringing him the solutions, right? And like I said, the problems he didn't even know existed.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's cool, isn't it? It's simple. It's just not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. It sounds right. It's simple, but it's not easy. That's a great takeaway.
Isn't it a horrible irony in life that the simplest things are the things that are so easy to forget about, let go of, right? And push aside, because sometimes the more I think we're addicted to complexity anyway, but sometimes the more complex things they can be more engaging, it can be more exciting at any given moment, or they can just seem like they're the highest priority. And a lot of times they're not. They're the loudest priority maybe, but not the highest.
Right. How do we balance staying optimistic and positive while still facing reality?
Oh my gosh. You know what? I'm judging a little bit based on just a couple conversations we had, but that's probably a question I should ask you on when you come on Keep It Human podcast.
Well, we can talk about that.
You're probably better at it than I am. I'm a cautious optimist, I guess. Because I'm very much a realist, and it may be, it's something I don't know. I don't think I'm going to live long enough to reconcile this in my life. I've worked through this with some therapists. It doesn't seem to take. I'm the kind of guy that has Wayne's World moments all the time. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. And when things are going really good, I can't help myself. I sink into this pit of when's something going to come along to screw this all up, right? And that's not a bad survival mechanism, by the way.
No, I guess not.
If we don't let it get too deep, right? But it can get deep, and then we can get anxious and depressed. So it's a kind of a funny balancing act that we all have to deal with. I think probably the best, from my own experience, the way that I manage it anyway, is by making sure that I consider the more desirable outcomes as well as the worst possible, you see? Because they're all out there, right? They're all out there floating around, but it's too easy to obsess about the worst possible outcome sometimes. We do need to face it. We need to embrace it. That's part of our process of being more comfortable with uncertainty. Imagine the worst, and then do whatever you can to prepare for it. Because I mentioned one anecdote to being uncomfortable with uncertainty is courage. But the mechanical part of it, if you want to call it that, is training and preparation, right? The
Hmm.
more we can anticipate the worst and train and prepare, the best we can. Again, I learned from my life in self-defense, right? I don't want to walk down the street. Some people do when they go through that process. I didn't feel like I really needed to have the experience to appreciate it. I didn't want somebody to whack me over the head and try to take my money.
Right.
But I knew that was a possibility, so I trained for it. And then that helped me become more comfortable with that possibility. At the same time, and this is exactly the template from that experience, somebody challenged me one time in a self-defense seminar that we were doing. They said, geez, that's a miserable way to look at life, that people are going to be jumping out and shooting at
Right.
us and stabbing us and whacking us over the head with things. I said, yeah, it is a pretty miserable way to look at it, isn't it? I said, but here's what happened to me through that process. I also learned how to pay attention more, you know, to be aware of my surroundings, to anticipate trouble. And I said that the fringe benefit of that, the best benefit of that is I also noticed many more beautiful, good, and wonderful things. You
Hmm.
see, it opened my eyes to everything, not just the bad things. And
Right.
so if we can take from that, and that's the old ancient masters, that's one of the reasons that they cited for practicing, warcraft, if you want to call it that. The
Mm.
warrior is often the person with much more open mind, much more open eyes, much more open ears, much more open heart. So
Right.
yeah, it's kind of a cool thing.
If listeners could take just one message from our conversation today, what should they be thinking about after listening to this podcast?
Well, yeah, if you don't mind, too, I'm gonna share really quick
Sure.
because we're talking to leaders, and I think the most important for us all to recognize as leaders is leadership's about a lot of things, but when people press me to narrow it down to one, leadership is sharing. A leader shares. The rest of our conversation is just about what we're willing to share and how we're willing to do it. But that's it. And then, in acknowledgement to the theme that we've been talking about today, years ago, I wrote a couple of books on strategies, just trying to template. These aren't these, I would never be arrogant enough to say the 8 strategies of effective leadership, right? But I put down 8 strategies for effective leaders that I thought would be useful. And one of them is exactly what you said, and I repeated it with strategies for rising leaders. Be flexible, adaptable, and comfortable with uncertainty. And then, of course, we've been talking about how to engage that process. So, and it is a process, right? Perfection is not a destination; it's a never-ending process.
Right.
There
Because
was
the field is always changing.
want to make the. I'm throwing cliches at you left and right. I love quotes. Right? You want to make one of my masters said, "You want to make the dragon laugh? Tell him your plans for tomorrow."
Right.
There
Well,
you
Jim,
go.
this has been wonderful to have you here. I'm going to walk away with a lot of things that I'm going to be thinking about. I really appreciate you sharing this with our listeners.
I appreciate the opportunity to share, and then we're going to have you on the Keep It Human podcast, and then you're going to do all the talking. How about that?
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
Jim has a very interesting story, and he's always trying something new. If you'd like to learn more about Jim and his work, please visit his website at keepithuman.network, or you can connect with him via LinkedIn, and you'll find a link to his profile in the show notes. Thank you for joining me for this episode. Until next time.